In this lesson, we're going to learn how to access the ice tree and how to edit the properties of our ice nodes so we can change how they interact with our scene, and we'll learn how we can increase the range of our playback so we can experiment a little bit more without having to hit the play key every 2 seconds. So here's where we left off, and you can open up 07 Ice Particle Sim End. And so we have our locator here. And let's take a look at how we can access our ice tree. So the first way we can do is we can go up to View, General, and Ice Tree. Now, the shortcut for this is Alt-9, and I often find myself using it, but I'm just going to go to Ice Tree. Now, this is going to pop up a new panel that has our ice tree inside of it. Now let me just move this off for a second to show you an alternative way to access this ice tree. You'll notice that this is floating, so it can sometimes cover up important information. Now I'm going to use it during this course because I have limited screen real estate, but if you're using a full screen, you might want to use the ice layout. You can find that under View, Layouts, and down here at the bottom is Ice. And this will split our view, one into the camera view and one into the ice tree view. Now, as you can see, I'm a little bit cramped for space here, so I'm going to switch my layout back to my default, but no matter where you're accessing your ice tree from, all we need to do is go into our ice tree panel. So now that we have this, the next thing is, how do we get the information? Well, it's all dependent on where the ice tree is created. Since we created an ice tree on this null, you might think, well, there's the ice tree and it's going to be inside this null. Well, yes and no. Yes, we are using this null inside of our ice tree, but the ice tree is actually living inside of the particles right now, or in other words, the point cloud. So we can left click and drag, select this point cloud here, but as you can see, we're selecting multiple objects because we are unfortunately selecting the background here. So again, we can either go to our scene and select our point cloud, or hit F3 to select our point cloud there as well. And as soon as we select our point cloud, you can see our ice tree becomes populated. Now, let me deselect everything so we can sort of reset our ice tree here. Sometimes, or most of the time while you're working in your ice tree, you're going to have it locked. Now, what happens is, when you select something that has your ice tree on it, such as your point cloud, you'll notice it says, no, there's still nothing there. That's because we need to come in here and hit this refresh icon. And what that will do is it will bring in the ice tree on whatever is selected. So remember, if you have the lock on, you need to click this update button to bring in or view your ice tree. So here is the ice tree that we're going to be building our effects on. And it's very simple. On the right here is the ice tree node, and everything needs to be, or everything that is connected into this is evaluated and run inside of our scene. So let's take a look at a few of these nodes. So we're getting the null inside of our scene, so there's that object. And then we're doing something called an emit from null, so we're emitting particles out of it. And then we're saying, okay, we need to plug that into our ice tree. And then finally, once we have some particles in our scene, let's simulate them. And that is what makes these particles fly out of our null. So let's take a look at how we can now edit some of these ice properties to change this effect. So let's come up here to our emit from null, and let's open up its properties panel by either selecting it and hitting enter, or we can simply double left click it. Now, some nodes, of course, will have less options than others. The emit from nodes are obviously very feature rich because they have a lot to do, but some of these other nodes will have very small property panels, and inside of them we can begin modifying this. So let's go to our emit from null, and let's change our color to something else. So let's give it a dark orange, and let's hit play. And you can see that our particles become orange. So now let's change them to green. Well, you're noticing that we can change the color, but they're not going to update in our viewport until we re-simulate them. So what happens is, this or these changes do not take effect in our ice tree until we hit the play button again. So you'll notice that we can change this color until we're blue in the face, but nothing's going to happen until we hit the play button. Now let's say we don't want to play all the way back from frame 1. We want to start playing from whatever our current frame is. Now to do that, we can middle click on the play icon, and that will begin playing forward. Now you'll see here now that we have particles that are both orange and white. Now this may be the effect you're going for. However, we have to be careful because if we hit play again, you'll notice that all of these particles are white. So we need to be careful whenever we stop and start a simulation in the middle after modifying something, because if we play it again, it might look pretty different. So let's say we want to do this a little bit easier instead of having to come down here and hit play all the time. Well, we can increase our play range and our time range by coming over here to this right-hand number box. And let's just put in another 0. So we're going out to 1,000 frames. And now we can hit play. So now our points are flying all over. Well, why did we just change that? Well, now that the simulation is running, we can come in here and begin to modify these properties and see them update in real time. So what I just did was I went up to my emission parameters and changed the rate, which simply shoots out more or less particles. And of course, we could set this to something even higher, like 2,000, and hit play. And now we can really come in and define what we want these values to be. Now again, changing these is not going to affect or keep the animation of our movement here. All we're doing is deciding what we want these initial values to be. So if we set it to 0 and then do something like this bursting effect, it's not going to be saved. The only thing that's going to be saved is whatever this number is at the, or whenever the simulation stops. So a big part of working with ice is going into these node property panels and changing different properties to get different effects. Of course, if we want a very strong and a very large rate, we can increase that. And one important thing we should note at this point is that we can overdrive these values here. So 200 is as far as I can go to the right, but if I want more, I can left click on this number here and type something else in, like 600. And now my slider here has changed. So remember that most of the time you're not stuck to whatever this slider is. You can usually type in a value and either overdrive it or make very small changes to it. So let's try a little bit of a lower rate because this is going to be a lot of particles. So let's try 50 here. Okay. And let's change the color to white or a slightly off-white. Of course, depending on what you want to get out of this scene, you might choose your own color. Let me scroll over here. Now we have a few more options that we might want to look at, and one of them is speed. So we can either make these particles fly out slower or much faster. We're going to want these to fly out pretty fast, so we can set this up to something like 7 or 8. Now, of course, our particles aren't really behaving very intelligently. They're kind of going through all of our geometry and just flying off into the scene. So what we need to do is we need to add some ice nodes to tell our particles what to do. Or in other words, we need to tell them that they need to interact with this beaker here. They need to have a little bit of gravity maybe. They just need to behave a little bit more intelligently. Now, before we end this, let's do one more thing. Right now, this is just shooting the particle straight up. I'd rather have it shoot it in all directions. We can do that by modifying our emit from null. So let's bring this back up. And let's increase the randomized direction end to 180. And what that is going to do is it's now going to spin, or not spin, but it's going to emit particles in every direction. So you can see that null is now emitting particles almost in every direction. So now, once we get these bouncing off our beaker here, we should get a very nice effect. So in the next lesson, we'll start by adding a gravity force. So in this lesson, we learned how to access our ice tree by going to View General Ice Tree, or using the Layout Ice, or hitting Alt-9. Of course, we need to select our point cloud if we're doing a point cloud ice tree that was created using our Emit Particles from Selection, and then hit the Update button. From here, we can double-click on these various nodes to edit their properties, which directly affect how they interact in the scene and how they interact with each other. So in the next lesson, we'll start adding some nodes and making this simulation more and more complex.